Chapter 1. The unthinkable proposal. Sophia Romano had never imagined that desperation could feel so heavy, pressing against her chest until it was almost suffocating. Her family's debts had reached a point where every day was a struggle to keep the roof over their heads and food on the table. She had worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs and sacrificing every ounce of her own comfort. But the bills only seemed to grow larger. Each knock on the door brought more reminders that creditors were closing in, and the fear in her father's eyes made her stomach churn with guilt. She had always been the one to shoulder the burden, the one to try and keep hope alive. But tonight hope felt like a fragile thread ready to snap. The meeting had been arranged by her father's trembling insistence, and Sophia had no choice but to go. She entered the grand, imposing mansion of the Vitale family with careful steps, her heart hammering in her chest. The walls were lined with dark wood, the floor polished to a reflective shine, and the air carried a subtle, intimidating sense of wealth and power. She felt completely out of place in her modest dress, every instinct screaming that she was stepping into a world far removed from her own. He was waiting for her in the main hall, standing with his back straight and shoulders squared. Luca Vitale exuded authority even in stillness. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried an air of danger that made her stomach twist. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously scrutinized and exposed. There was a calm about him that was terrifying, a quiet confidence that suggested he was in control of everything and everyone around him. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured, each word deliberate. He did not waste time with pleasantries or false friendliness. He presented his proposal clearly and without hesitation. 1 year of her obedience in exchange for her family's safety. The words hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment she could only stare at him, unable to breathe. Obedience was a term that carried weight far beyond her understanding. It implied control, submission, and a life that was no longer her own. Yet beneath the fear and confusion, a spark of determination flickered. She would do whatever it took to protect her family, even if it meant facing a man as dangerous as Luca Vitale. Sophia's mind raced with questions, doubts, and fears, but she knew there was no turning back. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Yet she could not leave her family to suffer the consequences. She swallowed hard and nodded, her voice trembling as she accepted the deal. Luca's expression remained unreadable, but there was a slight shift in his posture, a recognition of the choice she had made. As she left the room, 1,000 thoughts clashed in her mind. The world she had known, the life she had lived, had ended the moment she agreed to the deal. Ahead of her lay a path filled with uncertainty, danger, and the unknown rules of a world she could barely comprehend. Yet there was something magnetic about Luca Vitale, something that drew her in, despite her fear. His presence lingered in her thoughts, a constant reminder of the life she had entered and the man who held her family's fate in his hands. Sophia knew the journey ahead would be treacherous, that every step would test her courage, resolve, and ability to survive. She felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her, but within that weight, there was also a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, she felt that she had made a choice that mattered, a choice that could save her family. And though fear still gripped her heart, a tiny, defiant flame of hope sparked in her chest. She had made a deal with the devil's son, and there was no turning back. Chapter 2. A life in shadow. Sophia quickly realized that stepping into Luca Vitale's world was like walking into a different universe, one ruled by power, fear, and unspoken rules that she could barely comprehend. Every day was a careful dance, a test of her awareness and courage. She watched the staff, the enforcers, and even Luca himself, learning to read the subtle cues that dictated who was safe, who was favored, and who would face consequences for missteps. Nothing was ever casual, and even a smile or a glance could carry meaning far deeper than she could have imagined. Luca's presence was a constant shadow in her life, commanding attention without speaking, and reminding her at every turn of the gravity of the deal she had made. He was both terrifying and magnetic, his eyes always alert, calculating, as if he could see through every lie, every hesitation, every hidden fear. He gave orders with precision and expected them to be followed, and Sophia quickly learned that defiance or carelessness came with consequences she could not afford to risk. Yet despite the fear he inspired, there were moments when his control slipped, moments where the humanity behind his cold exterior peeked through in subtle ways that left her breathless. The world she had entered was darker than she had imagined. She witnessed power struggles, whispered threats, and displays of control that left her unsettled and awed all at once. She saw people who were loyal to Luca, not because they were forced, but because they respected him, feared him, or perhaps saw the complexity that few outsiders could perceive. Sophia felt like an intruder in a dangerous dance where every move mattered, and one misstep could have consequences she could not imagine. Yet she also felt a growing fascination with the man at the center of it all. Luca was not just a powerful figure, he was a mystery wrapped in layers of control, pride, and unspoken pain. Sophia struggled with the emotions that the world of shadows stirred in her. She felt fear, respect, and an undeniable attraction that confused her and made her cheeks flush in moments when she least expected it. She hated the hold he had over her, yet she could not deny the way her heart raced when he was near, the way his presence seemed to draw her in, and when every part of her told her to run. She felt resentment toward him for the deal she had been forced into, yet she could not ignore the subtle gestures of care and attention he occasionally showed. The complexity of her feelings left her in constant turmoil, and she wondered if she could ever reconcile her desire for independence with the reality of her situation. Every evening, when the mansion quieted and the shadows lengthened, Sophia reflected on the day's lessons. She realized that survival in this world required not just courage, but intelligence, patience, and the ability to adapt. She began to notice the small cracks in Luca's armor, the rare moments where he laughed quietly, or lingered a second too long when she looked at him, moments that suggested he was not the untouchable figure everyone feared. These glimpses of vulnerability confused her, making her heart ache in ways she did not understand and challenging every preconceived notion she had about the people who wielded power in such dangerous ways. Sophia also understood that she had to navigate her growing attraction carefully. Every look, every word, and every unintended touch carried meaning, and she had to decide how much of herself she was willing to risk. The tension between them was electric, a quiet, simmering energy that she could not escape. She realized that Luca was watching her just as closely as she watched him, measuring her reactions, testing her limits, and perhaps, in ways she did not yet understand, allowing himself to be affected by her presence as well. By the end of the week, Sophia felt as though she had stepped into a new life entirely, one where the line between fear and fascination, danger and desire, blurred more with each passing day. She understood that she could never go back to the world she had known. In the shadows of the Vitale mansion, amidst whispers of power and loyalty, she was learning not only how to survive, but also how to navigate the complex, intoxicating relationship that was growing between her and the man known to the world as the Devil's Son. Chapter 3. Unexpected. Sophia soon realized that surviving in Luca Vitale's world required more than caution and courage. She needed allies, people she could trust even in a place where loyalty was often bought or demanded. At first, she had assumed there would be none, that she would face each day alone, navigating danger and fear with only her wits to rely on. But as she spent more time within the mansion and observed the inner workings of the Vitale family, she began to notice subtle signs of warmth and guidance from unexpected sources. Marco, Luca's cousin, was the first to reach out. Unlike Luca, whose presence demanded attention and obedience, Marco carried a natural charm that made people feel at ease despite the tension that always surrounded the Vitale name. He had a mischievous smile and a playful way of speaking that could diffuse even the heaviest of silences. At first, Sophia was wary of him, uncertain whether his friendliness was genuine or simply another test of her ability to read people. But as days passed, she realized that Marco's loyalty to his family, and perhaps to her specifically, was real. He offered guidance when she struggled to understand Luca's expectations, small hints on how to navigate the hierarchy, and encouragement that reminded her that she did not have to endure this life entirely alone. ***. Isabella was another surprise. A confidant within the household, she understood the weight of secrecy and the burden of being connected to the Vitale family. She welcomed Sophia with a quiet understanding, listening without judgment to the fear and frustration she carried. Isabella shared small but crucial insights about the family's dynamics, about Luca's habits and moods, and about the delicate balance between obedience and survival. Through her, Sophia began to feel that trust could exist even in a world governed by power and danger, and that connection was possible if one knew where to look. Even Luca himself began to reveal cracks in his otherwise impenetrable demeanor. While he remained stern, commanding, and exacting, Sophia caught glimpses of subtle care in the way he observed her. He offered guidance through actions, rather than words, a nod here, a rare acknowledgement there, small gestures that communicated respect and attention. These fleeting moments both confused and intrigued her, leaving her heart racing and her mind spinning with questions she was not yet ready to answer. The alliances Sophia formed were delicate and required careful cultivation. She had to navigate the unspoken rules of interaction, to understand who could be trusted and who would act against her if given the chance. Every conversation, every interaction was layered with subtext, a test of perception and patience. Yet these allies, Marco and Isabella, became her anchor in the turbulent sea of mafia politics and power games. Their guidance and subtle support allowed her to face each day with more confidence and less fear. Even as the presence of Luca remained a constant, unyielding force in her life, amid the tension and danger, Sophia also began to notice the growing complexity of her feelings for Luca. The icy distance he maintained was challenging, yet moments of vulnerability, subtle concern, or fleeting softness drew her in against her will. She found herself thinking of him when he was not around, wondering what motivated his actions, and questioning the depth of the man behind the devil's son reputation. These thoughts were dangerous, she knew, but they were also impossible to suppress. By the end of the chapter, Sophia began to understand that survival in Luca's world was not only about obedience or courage, it was about understanding the people around her, recognizing unexpected kindness, and cultivating relationships that could support her in ways she had not imagined. She realized that these allies might be her only chance to navigate the dangers ahead, and that even in the darkest world, there could be trust, camaraderie, and subtle moments of light that offered hope for more than just survival. Chapter 4. The first test. Sophia's first real challenge came sooner than she expected, and it arrived like a storm that left her both terrified and exhilarated. She had grown accustomed to the subtle tension of the Vitale mansion, to the quiet observation and constant awareness required to survive each day. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the intensity of this test, a mission that demanded courage, quick thinking, and complete composure under pressure. She knew that failure was not an option, not if she wanted her family to remain safe and her place within Luca's world secure. Luca had been unusually silent that morning, his dark eyes focused on her with a sharp intensity that made her heart pound. He gave her only minimal instructions, expecting her to understand and act with precision. Every step she took, every decision she made, was watched, analyzed, and judged. The weight of his gaze was almost unbearable, a constant reminder that this mission was not just a test of her abilities, but of her loyalty and courage. She had to prove that she was capable, that she belonged, and that the deal she had made was not a liability, but an asset to the Vitale family. The challenge itself was more dangerous than anything Sophia had faced before. She was tasked with navigating a tense negotiation between two rival factions, a situation that could explode into violence at the slightest provocation. Her role was to act as a mediator, to convey messages accurately, and to maintain composure while surrounded by men whose reputations for ruthlessness were well known. Her hands shook as she approached the meeting room, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, to steady her nerves, and to focus entirely on the task at hand. Luca was nearby, a silent anchor that both comforted and terrified her. She could feel the tension radiating from him, his alertness matching her own. There were moments when their eyes met, brief flickers of understanding that communicated more than words ever could. She realized that he was not just observing her performance. He was assessing her resilience, her ability to maintain calm, and perhaps, in ways she did not yet understand, her potential to navigate the complexities of his world. The negotiation was intense, filled with sharp words, veiled threats, and subtle maneuvers designed to test her judgment. Sophia relied on the guidance Marco and Isabella had given her, drawing on their advice and her own instincts to respond appropriately. Every sentence she spoke, every gesture she made, had to convey confidence and neutrality, even as her heart raced and her pulse thundered in her ears. The danger was palpable, and the stakes higher than they had ever been in her life. Through the tension and uncertainty, something unexpected happened. Luca's presence shifted from that of a commanding overseer to a subtle source of support. His occasional nods, the rare lift of his brow, and the fleeting moments of acknowledgement gave her the courage to continue, to trust her instincts, and to navigate the negotiations successfully. She realized that their connection, complicated as it was, provided a strength she had not anticipated. She had thought of him as cold and untouchable, but in these moments, his attention and quiet support were vital lifelines. By the end of the mission, Sophia had not only proven her capability, but had also begun to sense the depth of her growing bond with Luca. She could no longer view him simply as a figure of authority or a man she feared. He was complex, demanding, and undeniably magnetic, and she found herself thinking about the way he had watched her, the way he had silently guided her, and the moments when their understanding seemed almost intuitive. Their chemistry was undeniable, and the tension that had simmered beneath the surface now pulsed like an unspoken truth between them. As they returned to the mansion, Luca finally spoke, his voice low and measured, offering a rare acknowledgement of her success. Sophia felt a mixture of relief, pride, and a confusing warmth at his words. The first test was over, but she understood that this was only the beginning. She had survived, but more importantly, she had learned something crucial about the world she had entered, and the man who ruled it. The Devil's Son was not just a figure of fear, he was a man capable of subtle care, and Sophia realized that navigating this dangerous path would require not just courage, but an understanding of the intricate, often hidden layers of loyalty, power, and emotion that defined Luca Vitale's life. Chapter 5. A glimpse of humanity. After the intensity of her first test, Sophia thought she understood the rhythm of Luca Vitale's world, but she soon realized that the deeper she went, the more complex everything became. There was danger, yes, and there was fear, but beneath the layers of control, calculation, and power, she began to see fleeting glimpses of something unexpected. She began to catch small, subtle moments that hinted at the man behind the Devil's Son reputation, a man who was not entirely untouchable, whose armor was not completely impenetrable. It started with small, almost unnoticeable gestures. Luca would pause mid-command to ensure that no one around him was overlooked, that even the smallest concerns were acknowledged. Sophia noticed the way his eyes softened for a brief second when he thought no one was watching, or how his hand would brush against an object as if lost in thought. There was a precision to his actions that revealed more than mere control. There was a careful attention to the world around him, a deliberate thoughtfulness that few had ever seen or appreciated. It fascinated her, this duality of cold power and quiet, almost hidden care. Sophia began to learn more about Luca's past, often through the fragments of conversation heard or the rare confidences shared by Marco and Isabella. She discovered that his life had been shaped by betrayal, loss, and the heavy expectations of a family that demanded loyalty above all else. Every choice he had made, every calculated move, was driven by experiences that had hardened him, that had not entirely stripped away his capacity for feeling. The man she had feared, the devil's son, was not only capable of ruthlessness, but also of tenderness in ways that were subtle yet profound. As the days passed, their interactions grew more layered. A delicate mix of command, tension, and quiet curiosity. Sophia noticed moments when Luca would linger slightly longer than necessary in her presence, when his gaze would hold hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. She felt an undeniable pull toward him, a mixture of fear, admiration, and attraction that left her conflicted. She struggled to reconcile the man she was drawn to with the dangerous figure who held her family's fate in his hands. Attraction that left her conflicted. She struggled to reconcile the man she was drawn to with the dangerous figure who held her family's fate in his hands. The mansion itself became a place where these small moments of intimacy could occur. Late at night, when the corridors were quiet and the staff had retired, Luca and Sophia would occasionally cross paths, and the exchanges were charged with unspoken meaning. A subtle touch of his hand on a document she was holding, a fleeting glance that lingered too long, or a rare, quiet word of acknowledgement spoke volumes. Each gesture, though measured, revealed a depth of feeling that neither fully admitted, but that both could not entirely ignore. Sophia began to understand that trust and connection were possible even in a world dominated by fear and power. The moments with Luca were dangerous in their emotional intensity, yet they offered her a rare glimpse of humanity that she had not expected to find. She found herself reflecting on him when he was not around, thinking about his past, his motivations, and the faint cracks in his otherwise impenetrable facade. The more she observed, the more she realized that Luca's control was a shield, one he wore to protect himself as much as to command others. Their growing intimacy was not defined by words, but by the subtle understanding that seemed to pass between them. The unspoken recognition of each other's presence, needs, and vulnerabilities. Sophia felt herself being drawn into his world, not just by fear or obligation, but by a slow, undeniable emotional connection. She realized that survival in Luca Vitale's world meant more than obedience. It required comprehension of the layers beneath the surface, a willingness to see and acknowledge the humanity hidden behind the reputation, and perhaps even a readiness to allow herself to care despite the danger. By the end of this chapter, Sophia understood that the devil's son was more than a figure of fear. He was a man of complexity, capable of subtle acts of kindness, moments of vulnerability, and emotions that defied the icy exterior he presented to the world. Sophia's heart was caught in a delicate balance between caution and curiosity, between fear and attraction. She knew that the journey ahead would test not only her courage, but also her capacity to navigate the intricate web of loyalty, emotion, and power that defined Luca Vitale, and she found herself strangely, reluctantly, drawn ever closer to the man she both feared and admired. Chapter 6: Secrets and Betrayal. Sophia had begun to feel a fragile sense of stability in Luca Vitale's world, a rhythm to the danger and tension that allowed her to navigate each day with more confidence. She had learned to anticipate his moods, understand the unspoken rules of the mansion, and even recognize the rare glimpses of humanity that made him both terrifying and magnetic. Yet nothing could prepare her for the secrets that would soon emerge. Secrets that threatened not only her place within the Vitale family, but her life and the safety of the people she loved most. It started with a subtle unease, a feeling she could not shake even as she tried to focus on her duties. She noticed hushed conversations between men she did not recognize, guarded glances exchanged in corners of the mansion, and a tension in Luca's demeanor that was more pronounced than usual. He had always been cautious, always aware, but now there was an edge to him, a silent warning that something was amiss. Sophia's instincts told her that the calm she had grown accustomed to was fragile, and that the world she had entered could turn hostile in an instant. The revelation came suddenly. During a routine task that took her deeper into the operations of the Vitale family than she had been before, she overheard fragments of a conversation that hinted at betrayal within the family, a plot that could put Luca's life and the safety of her own family at risk. Her heart pounded as the reality of the danger sank in. This was not a test, not a mission designed to gauge her loyalty. This was real, and the stakes were terrifyingly high. When she confronted Luca, carefully choosing her words, she was met with a rare and powerful display of his protective instincts. The man known to the world as the Devil's Son shifted immediately, his attention focused entirely on her and the threat she had uncovered. There was no pretense, no calculation, just raw determination to protect what mattered to him. Sophia realized in that moment that he was not only aware of the danger, but also deeply affected by the fact that it had touched her. His reactions were intense, almost overwhelming, and for the first time, Sophia saw the depth of his emotions laid bare a way that was both frightening and captivating. The danger forced them to confront their growing emotions in ways they had carefully avoided. Fear and attraction collided, and the line between obligation and genuine feeling became impossible to ignore. Sophia saw Luca's anger, his frustration, and his fear intermingle with tenderness in fleeting moments that made her pulse quicken and left her questioning the strict boundaries she had tried to maintain. It was clear that their connection had grown beyond the transactional nature of their arrangement, and neither could deny the intensity that now defined their interactions. Navigating the betrayal required careful strategy and trust. Sophia had to act quickly, relying on the allies she had carefully cultivated, while also understanding that Luca's power and judgment were absolute. Every decision carried weight, and mistakes could be fatal. Yet in the midst of fear and uncertainty, there were moments of quiet collaboration between them. Moments where their understanding of each other's thoughts and instincts allowed them to move as a unit. A silent partnership forged under pressure. Sophia also learned something about herself in the process. She discovered a courage she had not known she possessed, a resourcefulness and determination that went beyond mere survival. She realized that the danger, though terrifying, was shaping her into someone capable of more than she had ever imagined. And as she witnessed Luca's protective intensity, his willingness to risk everything for those he cared about, she could no longer view him as a distant, untouchable figure. He was someone whose strength was matched by complexity, and whose vulnerability, though rarely displayed, could leave her breathless and profoundly affected. By the end of the chapter, the immediate threat had been managed, but the emotional and psychological aftermath lingered. Sophia felt the weight of the secrets and betrayals she had uncovered, the intensity of the bond that had formed between her and Luca, and the undeniable truth that danger was never far from their lives. The line between fear and desire, obligation and genuine affection, had blurred irrevocably. Sophia knew that the journey ahead would demand not only courage and loyalty, but also an emotional resilience that she was only beginning to understand. The Devil's Son was no longer just a figure of intimidation. He was a man whose heart and mind were as complex as the world he ruled. And Sophia was now irrevocably entwined in both. Chapter 7, Confessions in the Dark. Night had a heavy stillness that seemed to press against Sophia's chest as she moved quietly through the corridors of the Vitale mansion. The usual hum of activity was gone, leaving only the distant echo of footsteps and the soft flicker of light from the chandeliers above. Everything about the evening felt charged, as if the air itself held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Sophia's thoughts were a tangled mess of fear, excitement, and something she dared not name aloud. A dangerous mixture of emotions she could no longer suppress. Luca appeared almost silently at her side, his presence both startling and comforting. The intensity in his dark eyes made her pulse quicken, and she realized that the distance she had tried to maintain between them was dissolving with every shared glance and unspoken understanding. Tonight, there would be no distractions, no need for control or performance. They were alone, and for the first time, the walls they had built around themselves could crumble, if only for a moment, The conversation began cautiously, both of them navigating the delicate balance between vulnerability and caution. Sophia spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper as she admitted her fear, the uncertainty that had haunted her since she entered Luca's world, and the confusion she felt about the deal that had bound her to him. Her words trembled, but there was a raw honesty in her confession that left her feeling both exposed and strangely liberated. Luca listened without interruption, his dark eyes fixed on her face, reading every inflection, every hesitation, every heartbeat that betrayed her inner turmoil. When it was his turn to speak, the barrier between them seemed to shift. Luca's voice was low and steady, but beneath it lay a depth of emotion he had rarely revealed. He spoke of the pain that had shaped him, the betrayals that had hardened him, and the weight of expectations he carried as the son of a powerful and ruthless family. For the first time, he allowed Sophia to see the vulnerability behind his calculated exterior, the man who had learned to control the world around him because he could not always control the wounds within. Their confessions brought them closer, emotionally and physically, in ways that neither had anticipated. Sophia felt the heat of his presence, the subtle shift in his posture as he leaned slightly closer, the unspoken reassurance in the quiet steadiness of his gaze. It was a moment of profound intimacy, fragile and fleeting, yet charged with an intensity that left them both breathless. Every word, every glance carried weight, and for the first time, they acknowledged the truth that had been growing between them. Their bond was no longer just a matter of obligation or survival. It was something far deeper, something neither could deny. Despite the tenderness of the moment, danger still lingered at the edges of their lives, a reminder that the world outside the mansion's walls was unforgiving and merciless. Yet within this private, suspended space, Sophia and Luca allowed themselves to be seen, to be honest, and to share the parts of themselves that had been hidden from everyone else. It was a risk, yes, but one they were both willing to take, understanding that the trust they extended to each other in these confessions was a rare and powerful gift. As the night deepened, the silence between them was no longer heavy, but charged with unspoken understanding. Sophia felt the pulse of Luca's emotions as keenly as her own, a mirrored reflection of fear, longing, and hope that tied them together in ways that words could only begin to describe. They did not need to rush, did not need to define the bonds they had acknowledged. In that moment, it was enough to simply exist together, to feel the fragile thread of trust and connection that had formed through shared danger, shared confessions, and shared vulnerability. By the time the first light of dawn began to creep through the tall windows of the mansion, Sophia understood something fundamental. The devil's son, for all his power and reputation, was capable of a depth of feeling that few would ever see, and she, in turn, was no longer merely a participant in his world, but a partner in the emotional terrain that defined him. Their confessions in the dark had created a bridge between fear and desire, obligation and love, and Sophia knew that crossing it would change both their lives forever. Chapter 8. A test of loyalty there in the Vitale mansion was taut with tension as Sophia awoke that morning, a deep unease pressing against her chest. Word had arrived of a threat looming over the family, a force from outside that sought to challenge Luca's authority and destabilize the carefully controlled world he had built. Sophia felt the familiar churn of fear in her stomach, but it was now intertwined with a sense of determination. She could no longer view herself as merely a pawn in the devil's son's world. Her choices, her actions, and her courage would matter, perhaps more than she had ever realized. Luca appeared soon after she had been briefed, his presence commanding and sharp as always. But today, there was something different in his eyes, a deeper intensity that went beyond observation. He needed to know where her loyalties lay, not just through words, but through deeds, and Sophia understood that the coming hours would test her in ways she had not anticipated. The danger was real, immediate, and unforgiving, leaving no room for hesitation or uncertainty. The test itself was unlike anything Sophia had faced before. She was asked to take an active role in a confrontation that required both strategic thinking and unflinching courage. She was to deliver critical intelligence, make split-second decisions, and navigate a situation where one wrong move could result in devastating consequences for everyone she cared about. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the arena of danger, every nerve alert, every sense heightened. She could feel Luca's eyes on her, steady and unwavering, a silent anchor that reminded her that she was not alone, even as the peril pressed in from every direction. The mission demanded more than obedience. It demanded instinct, intelligence, and unwavering courage. Sophia relied on the lessons she had learned from Marco and Isabella, on the careful observations she had made of Luca's strategies and patterns, and on her own emerging confidence. Every choice was critical, every action measured against the potential consequences. The tension was suffocating, but it also brought an unexpected clarity. She could no longer act as a passive participant. She had to rise, to prove not just her loyalty, but her worth in a world that demanded excellence and survival in equal measure. Through the chaos, moments of connection with Luca surfaced in ways that were almost imperceptible but profoundly meaningful. A subtle nod, a fleeting glance, or a brief gesture conveyed understanding and trust that words could not capture. Sophia realized that their partnership had evolved into something more than the arrangement that had begun their association. They moved almost in sync, reading each other's intentions, anticipating reactions, and supporting one another in ways that revealed a bond far deeper than obligation. The fear that had always accompanied Luca's presence now mingled with a strange warmth, a sense that they were facing the danger together, and that their connection had become an unspoken strength. The climax of the confrontation tested everything they had learned and endured. Sophia's instincts guided her as she navigated a dangerous path, and Luca's watchful protection ensured that their efforts were coordinated and effective. In the heat of the moment, the intensity of their emotions could no longer be contained. Fear, adrenaline, and attraction collided, creating a charged atmosphere in which their growing trust and undeniable connection became a lifeline. Sophia understood that she had not only proven her loyalty, but also demonstrated her courage and resilience in a way that deeply affected Luca. By the time the threat had passed, Sophia was exhausted yet exhilarated. She had survived, yes, but more importantly, she had established herself as an indispensable part of Luca's world. The Devil's Son's gaze, previously cold and commanding, now carried a depth of appreciation and recognition that both thrilled and unnerved her. She realized that their relationship had changed irrevocably. She was no longer just a bargaining piece in his world. She had become a partner in the shared struggles, the shared dangers, and the growing emotional bond that defined them. As the mansion quieted once more, Sophia reflected on what she had learned. Loyalty was not merely a matter of obedience. It was forged through courage, trust, and the willingness to stand alongside someone, even when the stakes were life and death. And in that realization, Sophia understood that the connection between her and Luca had deepened beyond fear, beyond obligation, and into something that neither could ignore. In the shadowed halls of the Vitale mansion, trust had been tested, boundaries had shifted, and love had begun to take roots in the most dangerous of soil. Chapter 9. Love against the odds. Chaos of the mafia world had escalated, and the calm that Sophia had grown accustomed to in the Vitale mansion was gone. Rival families and hidden enemies were striking with precision, testing Luca's power and the loyalty of everyone around him. The stakes were higher than ever, and the tension in every corridor, every meeting, and every glance reminded Sophia that danger was never far from their lives. Yet amid this chaos, a new and undeniable truth had taken root. Her love for Luca Vitale and his love for her were no longer secrets to themselves. It was a bond that had survived fear, tests, and the relentless pressures of a world that demanded vigilance and courage. The acknowledgement of their love did not simplify anything. If anything, it made the dangers more acute. Sophia and Luca had to navigate their growing passion, while also managing the very real threats to their lives and the lives of those they cared about. Every decision carried weight, and every misstep could be catastrophic. Yet their bond gave them strength. Together, they were no longer just a man and a woman bound by a contract or circumstance. They were allies, partners, and increasingly, a refuge for one another in a world that offered little safety or certainty. The days were filled with strategy, confrontation, and the constant need to anticipate danger. Sophia had grown into her role, her instincts sharpened by months of immersion in the Vitale world. She was no longer simply following Luca's orders. She was contributing, thinking ahead, and taking decisive actions that proved invaluable. Yet, even with this growth, there were moments when fear gripped her, when the weight of their enemy's ruthlessness threatened to overwhelm. It was in those moments that Luca's presence became her anchor, his protective instincts blending with tender caring ways that left her heart racing and her resolve strengthened. Even amidst the tension, there were fleeting moments of intimacy that were both dangerous and irresistible. A lingering touch while passing through the mansion, a quiet conversation away from prying eyes, or a look that held unspoken promises. All of these small gestures became lifelines in a world otherwise defined by violence and mistrust. Their love had grown not in grand declarations or dramatic displays, but in the subtle understanding, mutual respect, and the shared courage required to face danger together. It was a slow, simmering fire, one that demanded patience, but burned with an intensity that neither could ignore. The ultimate test of their bond came when an unexpected betrayal threatened to tear the Vitale family apart. Sophia and Luca were forced to act decisively, relying not just on their individual skills, but on the strength of their connection. In the heat of confrontation, every decision carried life or death consequences, and the intensity of their emotions surged to the surface. Fear, love, anger, and desire collided, creating a charged atmosphere that left both of them breathless and acutely aware of the depth of their feelings. In that moment, there was no room for doubt. They needed each other, not only to survive but to protect the family, the life, and the fragile hope they had built together. As the dust settled, Sophia realized that their love had become a force of its own, powerful enough to endure threats from outside and to challenge the rules and expectations of the world around them. She could see it in Luca's eyes, the rare vulnerability mixed with unwavering resolve. He was no longer just the devil's son, the feared and untouchable heir of a mafia empire. He was a man capable of love, devotion, and deep connection. A man who had chosen her even amidst chaos, even amidst danger. Sophia understood that acknowledging their love came with risks, but it also brought clarity and courage. They had chosen each other not because it was safe, but because it was real. And in the shadowed world of the mafia, where loyalty could be bought, and betrayal lurked around every corner, their love had become both their shield and their strength. It was a love forged in adversity, tested by fire, and proven against every odds, and it was theirs alone to protect and cherish. No matter what challenges the world continued to throw at them. By the end of the chapter, Sophia and Luca were no longer merely participants in a dangerous game. They were a team, united by trust, passion, and shared courage. The odds might have been against them, but together, they had discovered a truth stronger than fear or danger. Love, even in the darkest corners, could endure, thrive, and transform everything it touched. Chapter 10. A new beginning's deal had ended, and yet the echoes of the past year still lingered in every corner of the Vitale mansion. Sophia Romano had survived the trials, the dangers, and the intricate games of loyalty and power that had defined her life since she had first agreed to Luca Vitale's proposition. But she had also grown in ways she had never imagined, discovering a strength, resilience, and courage that had been dormant within her. She had faced fear head-on, navigated treacherous alliances, and earned the respect of a world that had once seemed impenetrable. And through it all, her relationship with Luca had transformed from obligation into a deep, undeniable love that neither could ignore. Luca, the devil's son, had also changed. The icy control he had once wielded with effortless authority had softened in subtle ways, tempered by his growing love for Sophia and the trust he had placed in her. He had learned that vulnerability did not make him weak, and that opening his heart to someone he cared for could bring strength and clarity rather than compromise. Sophia had become more than a bargaining piece. She had become his partner, his confidant, and the one person who could navigate the labyrinth of his emotions and the dangerous world he inhabited. Their days were no longer defined solely by tension and survival, but by the delicate balance of love, trust, and shared responsibility. Sophia had carved out her own space in Luca's world, respected not only for her bravery and intelligence, but for the emotional insight and loyalty that had become integral to the family's cohesion. She and Luca moved through their lives side by side, their partnership a blend of passion, strategy, and tenderness. Even in the midst of the mafia's ever-present dangers, there was now room for laughter, subtle touches, and moments of quiet intimacy that felt sacred precisely because they had been so hard-1. Despite the shadows that still lingered in the edges of their lives, Sophia and Luca embraced the possibility of a future together. They found ways to protect each other and those they loved while creating a private world within the chaos, a sanctuary built from trust, understanding, and the fierce devotion that had grown between them. Their love was no longer just a secret whispered in corridors or hidden in fleeting glances. It was a force that shaped their decisions, guided their actions, and anchored them in a world that often felt unpredictable and dangerous. The mansion, once a place of constant tension, now held traces of their shared joy. Quiet mornings where they could speak freely without fear. Evenings where they could sit together and plan not just family strategy, but personal dreams and the small, intimate gestures that required no words. All of these became the threads weaving their lives together. Sophia marveled at how far she had come. From the frightened young woman forced to sign a deal for her family's safety to a confident, courageous woman whose love and partnership with Luca had redefined both of their worlds. Even the devil's son's reputation had begun to shift, not because he had lost power, but because those who knew him best saw the transformation brought about by love. Luca's family, his allies, and even those who had once doubted Sophia's place within the mansion came to recognize that strength was not only measured in ruthlessness, but in loyalty, courage, and the capacity for genuine connection. Together, Sophia and Luca had created a new standard, one where love and power could coexist, where vulnerability was not weakness, and where trust could flourish even in the darkest corners of a dangerous world. As they stood together on the balcony overlooking the city, the wind tugging gently at Sophia's hair and the lights below twinkling like distant stars, she felt a profound sense of peace. Luca's hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally, and in that simple touch, she felt the promise of countless tomorrows. They had faced the shadows, endured trials, and confronted dangers that had tested every fiber of their beings. Now, they could face the future together, not as master and pawn, not as devil's son and reluctant partner, but as equals, bound by love, respect, and an unshakable commitment to each other. The world of the mafia had not disappeared, and it never would. But within that world, Sophia and Luca had carved a space for themselves, a life where passion, trust, and tenderness were not luxuries, but necessities. They had discovered that love, once earned and nurtured, could withstand fear, danger, and the weight of the past. As they embraced under the night sky, hearts beating in unison, they knew that this was only the beginning, not of the trials or dangers they might face, but of a life filled with courage, love, and the promise of a future they had chosen together. Sophia had made her deal with the devil's son, but in the end, it had led her to something far more powerful than fear or obligation. It had led her to love, to strength, and to a new beginning that neither of them could have imagined, yet both would cherish for the rest of their lives.